Hi everyone, and welcome to this wonderful lecture session from the horror program at the University of the Underground. I'm Aggie Haynes. I'm a head of the horror program, which is a critical exploration. Wow, that's a tongue twister into illicit societal fears and human passion for horror. We're going to be investigating institutions and popular culture through the lens of the horror genre in dramaturgy, film, costume making, and more. The University of the Underground is a free, pluralistic, and transnational university founded in 2017 and birthed in the basements of nightlife venues. So we're non-profit, we're a registered charity. So if you'd like to donate, please visit universityoftheunderground.org. On this website, you can also find lots of other exciting programming, times, and events. Also, check out the Instagram page. There's loads of amazing talks that have been hosted from University of the Underground. So we're super excited to be hosting Danielle Brathwaite-Shirley. Danielle's work uses forms and imagery of video games to create works that consider what archives have left out and how we can archive now. So Danielle works predominantly in animation, sound, performance, and video games to communicate the experiences of being a Black trans person. Danielle's practice focuses on recording the lives of Black trans people, intertwining lived experience with fiction to imaginatively retell trans stories, spurred on by a desire to record the history of trans people, both living and past. Their work can often be seen as a trans archive where Black trans people are stored for the future. Throughout history, Black, queer, and trans people have been erased from the archives. Because of this, it's necessary not only to archive our existence, but also the many creative narratives we've used and continue to use to share our experiences. Danielle's work has been shown in loads of amazing places: ICA, Albright Knox, David Kordansky, Quad, the Science Gallery, Moo Gallery, the Barbican, and the Tate. So take it away when you're ready, Danielle. Thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, I'm just gonna, let me start this presentation actually. All right, so I'm gonna start by sharing my screen and then I'll share some stuff with you. Just like a little heads up, there's no like super gruesome things or anything, but there is a little bit of like just horror gifs that I've taken from the internet. But I'm not gonna just try and jump scare you randomly, just let you know that. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of go through some of my inspirations just to begin with in terms of horror. And then I'm gonna show you like some examples of how I kind of interpret horror and kind of use the tropes of horror against itself a little bit. So this is one of my favorite artists called Junji Ito. They are a very famous artist for making these like wild horror mangas. It's very like visceral, very textural. The stories are often, it's very body horror. And that's something that I really enjoy. I really love the way they use the body and horror, and it's something that's always recognizable, but also that's why it's the most disgusting thing. It's like a really interesting way of looking at it. Then there's, of course, everyone knows Stephen King's It. And the reason Stephen King's It is really interesting is not because of the film, because if you read the book, you understand more that it is this thing or this genre of horror called cosmic horror. And essentially what it means is that it isn't a monster, it is like part of the universe. So it's a being that's existed since the beginning of time and exists solely for the purpose of feeding off fear of others. And so it's a really interesting way of interpreting horror, because instead of it being this monster, it's an unimaginable form which uses the fears and perceptions of others to harm each other and then feeds off that fear itself. And I'm actually making a whole kind of work about cosmic horror, but based on like the colonial legacy. And so my cosmic horror is this, the death of colonial legacy and how someone tries to wake it up and what that means. And then, okay, later on, you're gonna see like how this affects my aesthetics. But the first kind of horror thing I experienced is this game called Blade on PS1. And at the time, it really got to me because I was young. I was still young enough to think that when people died in movies, they died in real life. And so when it came to video games, seeing Wesley Snipes in the Blade game, I thought they had to take the essence of Wesley Snipes somehow, put him into the digital world. And so when you're playing as Wesley Snipes and if he dies, you're also responsible for a part of Wesley Snipes dying. Like, of course, my imagination was making this far realer than it actually was. But it's something that stuck with me. And it has meant that graphics that look like this have a very certain appeal to me, and instantly invoke this idea of horror and mystery. And that might be because there's a lack of detail, so your brain kind of fills it in. But there's other examples that I have after this, like Silent Hill, where they use a similar thing about you're not often seeing much of what's happening. You're not often seeing much of the creatures, but they're using a lot of your own interpretations of what's going on to make it more scary. So it's less about designing like the most terrifying monster and more about making sure that you're filling in the blanks, because there's nothing more scary than your own imagination, really. Yeah, I love all these games. So you're going to see a lot of games in mine because that's a lot of my influences. This is Dementium the Ward. It's one of the only 3 18+ DS games. It's a horror game. Essentially, they pitched it as a Silent Hill game, and they kind of made the whole game before they got the license. And so they couldn't release it as Silent Hill. So they re-edited it and released it as Dementium the Ward. But the thing that's really interesting about this is because they made it on a DS, they didn't have much to work with. And that meant that the field of view and the length of what you could see in the room wasn't far. So they had to obscure everything with this black fog. And it gives this really oppressive, claustrophobic atmosphere. And as well as like, they did a really good job on using like 5 polygons to make something look kind of very creepy and scary. And it's very, very effective use of simplicity and atmosphere to actually build upon this idea of horror. Yeah, but then again, so the other thing I have to think about a lot, I'm going to skip some of these slides, but I'm going to go to this one, is like the history of horror and the history of how certain films use certain tropes to make people scared of real people, and how horror, some films and film industries use horror as a way to like dehumanize certain people. And so there was a huge trend, especially after Psycho came out, of trans murderers or trans like psycho killers, and this trans horror narrative. And actually before Psycho came out, there was a lot of famous trans people that were about. It was like there were a load of people that transitioned in the public eye, and they were like huge celebrities, especially in America and Britain. And then when Psycho came out, the whole kind of narrative about a trans person shifted. And it's really strange because like we don't really consider that a possibility, but you can really trace the change in perception of trans people and horror together. And so now we have, so this one's called Sleep Away, bottom is Psycho, and the one on the right-hand side is a more recent example with Insidious. And you have certain games that do this as well, such as, what's it called, that game based on? I've forgotten it now, it'll come back to me. But you have like certain games doing this as well, where the murderer turns out to be a trans person, or probably not a trans person, but the director's idea of what a trans person would be and how they would be a murderer. And so horror has some really interesting ways of making people scared of people, making people wary of certain kinds of people. And this is something that I think is a really interesting thing to look at in horror, especially when you're making your own stuff. And this is kind of where the basis of a lot of my work comes from, is that I often make a lot of monsters that look scary, but are actually not bad people at all. But it's your perception of your fear of them that makes you assume they're terrible and makes you assume that you should be hurting them. And within games, they do that often where, for example, they make someone seem scary enough that you should be allowed to like shoot them, you know? And so it's essentially like giving you the right to kill someone because they're saying that if this person exists, they're gonna cause harm to you and harm to everyone around you and harm to the world. And so I think there's a really strange correlation between like dehumanization and horror, and who horror chooses to dehumanize and when. And this happens not just within horror, it happens within a lot of genres of media. And so, and I will keep, yeah. And so onto one of my huge inspirations. So this is a game called Shin Megami Tensei. This came out on the SNES, I think in like 1992 or something like this. And it was the kind of one of the first, it's probably not the first horror game, but one of the first games that like fused horror and mistaking perception for thinking that you know what's good and what's bad. And so essentially they would make you like kill and harm people that actually you're making, you have to make that decision to do that, knowing that the consequences are not necessarily good, and that you're making this based on your flawed moral assumptions. And it came back ages ago, and it's a really interesting way of looking at how we can't make these decisions. Like we can't make a decision to harm someone or to harm something without eventually actually hurting someone who's probably going to be innocent. And I really like the way that this game plays with that. And so this is why it's one of my main inspirations. And so to my kind of work, and I'm going to show you a clip from my phone. So I made this back in 2019. It's a work called Digging for Black Trans Life. And I made it after I was looking in the archive. And the only thing I could find in the archive was this image of a Black trans woman in 1836. And it was a poster warning people of this trans woman. And so the poster calls her a man monster, and they warn people of her, and essentially making her into this monster, although the image of her is very nice, you know. And for me, this is a really interesting kind of comparison between making someone who's human seem inhuman, and using these tropes of horror to make someone who looks normal seem terrifying. And so imagine posters like this were put around everywhere in 1836, and we kind of have the fruits of those, the births of those ideas that were germinating in people's minds now, you know, with like people that really hate trans people and are terrified that they're going to hurt everyone, hurt all their kids and all this stuff. But that idea has been, you know, planted, and it's been worked on in order to get to that point where you can look at someone and instantly assume they do monstrous things. And so let me just share with you part of my video. Oh yeah. Okay. And I'm not speaking too fast, just checking, right? If I am, let me know. Okay. All right, I'm not going to show you all of this because it's 40 minutes long, so we're not doing that. Okay, here we go.
I'm going to go into a retell with you. I know what you are. Are you trying to defend yourself? Let me take that with you. Your gender is fake. Your gender is what I say it is. You're not going to be what I say you are. You will not be remembered. And you will be buried. I'm going to bury you. And then I'm going to rewrite what I think you are. I am taking history while I burn you. You will burn. You will be buried. this way. Please don't take the think it's too late for me.
All right. Okay, let's get back to this. Right. And so that was something I made in 2019. And I kind of performed this whole was not a ritual, but a performance, a 40-minute performance along to the animation where I'd like interact with these demons coming off the screen. And so when you know, they're saying they're disarmed and trying to like attack the screen and stuff, and there's this body in the space that do we have better pictures? Yeah, there's this body in the space here in this casket that we resurrect, and then everyone else in the audience has to bury it together. And so here like the horror changes from this thing on screen to like the fact that we're talking about death and the fact that we're talking about burying someone, and then everyone's getting their hands dirty within the performance, kind of essentially. And it usually ended by everyone standing up because they just buried this body, like reburied this body after I hyperventilated, because I would wear the costume at a certain point. And it was a really interesting thing for me because it was the first time I'd done anything like that. But you saw how the horror didn't have to be in something that was essentially there or that came off the screen or that looked creepy, but it could be instead felt in kind of like a shared action that people did, or that they felt they had to do and then were horrified that that was the thing that was done. And even though the thing that they were supposed to do was like bury the body and like really take care of it and like care that this person has been erased from history, the thing that they usually felt after was like they were just like, oh my god, like this is terrifying, like this is really scary, like what is going on? Why are we burying this body? Who is this person? Like what have I done? What am I taking part in? And so there's a really interesting mix between trying to make someone care and seeing that they were unable to care because they didn't have the same references, but they were still taking part in something that they would consider a ritual that's not quite right, if that makes sense. So for me, that was a really interesting aspect of it, which led me to make this next film. Okay, so this is very separate from horror, but I think it's good to talk about. So at the time, I was really into esports. I don't know if anyone's into esports. I love esports. I'm a nerd from top to bottom, can't lie. But at the time, I was like super into esports, and it was very interesting to me. But I grew up with the FGC, which is the fighting game community. And this is more of the billion-dollar esports League of Legends industry. And so all that means essentially is that most people on the League of Legends in the billion-dollar stage are white, and a lot of the other people on the FGC, the fighting game community, are black. And there's a really weird shift in race when it comes to that. And I'm not embedded enough in the world to understand why that's the case. But it's really strange, because often when it seems where the big money is, everyone is not black, and there's no black people there present at all. And then where the little money is, which is the FGC, everyone is black. So it's very confusing. I didn't quite understand that. So I made this film, which you can play. Should I make you play it? Nah. No, maybe I will. Maybe I will. If you all type in, why not? If you all type in resurrectionland.com and mute yourselves, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to play, to get through the intro and kind of see what you think. Is that okay?
Yeah, awesome.
We're good. And I can post it in the chat just in case. And you've got 3 minutes left. Okay, everyone come back. You can play that whenever you want, if you want to. So the reason I made this one is because I was thinking about archiving and how archives are often misused, misrepresented, and what would be the worst case for me if we were to make like a Black trans archive? What would be like the horror for us to experience when that possibility came true? And for me, it was if someone treated the archive like a game, like treated it so unseriously, as a way to make capital off and a way to just have fun. And so this idea spawned that when I wrote the story is that we had developed a technology to scan the earth and bring back like the memories of anyone we wanted. And so we scanned the earth and found any Black trans people and put them all into this digital library, and they became sentient. And over the years, people wanted to visit those archives and speak to them. And the more people that spoke to them, the more people started seeing potential to use the archive in their own ways. And then eventually, as you probably saw in the intro, that the archive becomes this esports game where everyone just is misusing it the whole time. And that work was paired with this, and again, I think there's a theme, 40-minute animation piece. I don't know why I always do that. That like explained a story on top of the game that you play. So the game that you would play is actually the archive, and then this film would be how people dealt with the realization that this archive had been misused and how they tried to take it back, basically. And if they failed, I'm not going to tell you, I'm not going to ruin the story. And if they failed and if they didn't. And so, yeah, this is all kind of, this was my idea of, I guess, horror. It's not necessarily scary. It's not like a scary story. Like you don't play it and you don't jump. You're not looking behind your bed to find like an evil little demon. But it was more looking again at that kind of man monster poster, this idea that the archive can be horror for someone else, and how the archive and how they're remembered can be a kind of horror of history, a kind of way of making sure no one can ever get their foot hold in the world and find their place within existence, and always like doubting yourself. And so that's kind of, those are the themes I was looking at with that work. And then after that, this image has worked for a lot of things. I probably use it in every work. I actually built this archive. I made an archive, which you can play online as well. I'm not going to do that. I can send you the link after. called blacktransarchive.com. And so I worked alongside, I think it was about 12, 15, I always get the number wrong, Black trans people. And what we did is that we tried to archive each of them in their own way. And so the thing we wanted to do was invent our own way of archiving. And that was a really important part of the process. But in order to do that, we had to figure out how that worked. And so when you play this archive, one of the first questions it asks you is, what do you identify as? And I think the options are Black and trans, trans, or not trans. And depending on that, it will determine what you can see and if it's scary or not. So if you pick your not trans option, it's kind of really creepy. And you get this kind of beginning moment of like realizing that you could be the horror, and depending on how you look at someone and like your gaze on someone's particular body, and how sometimes cis people are looking at trans people as detectives and trying to find the clues to call them out on not being trans enough or passing enough or things like this. And so that work was really interesting because depending on who you were and how you played it, you either had a really nice experience. So on the Black trans side, like it's very nice. It talks about people's stories and but like narrates them in a cartoon way. But if you're not trans, you get this kind of very horror, creepy mirror of yourself. And the game changes depending on what choices you make. And so you might end up being the monster within the game or not, which was a really fun thing, but also wasn't my choice to do. And the reason I say it wasn't my choice is because when we were building the archive, because we hadn't built one before, it was led by the people we had. And so one of the first questions was, where is this archive going to be? And people said, I want it to be accessible everywhere. So we said, okay, we'll build it so it can be online as well as installed. And then someone asked the question, okay, everyone's going to be able to play it as it's online. How do we make sure that people don't misuse it? And that's how the idea of choosing your own identity came in, and having these different pathways and having a completely different story depending on who you are, and actually the archive becoming a reflection of your choices rather than just an archive where you can like learn about someone else, which is a really interesting way of thinking about it. And it wasn't something I was thinking about until people were bringing it up. And so it was a really interesting process of thinking about like fear, and thinking about how we're using fear to protect ourselves and saying we're worried about this, let's put in a choice to make sure that doesn't happen. And at the same time kind of using the fear of how people have perceived us as characters in the game, and building characters around them, and I think we built a character around how people look at trans people's bodies. And so there's this body covered in clues, and people are looking at the parts of their bodies for clues to like signify like who you are and if you have what and all this kind of stuff. So that was that. And then we move on to one of my favorite works, which this is so weird. You're like, why is Spider-Man there? But I can't remember a time I didn't see you. It actually it first was inspired by Spider-Man on PS1. And that is a really weird inspiration. But the thing that really interested me is that the limitations at the time meant that when Spider-Man was swinging through the city, they couldn't render the entire city to the ground. So they had to figure out, how can we make sure that we don't have to do that? So they added in this fog, this yellow fog everywhere. And so if Spider-Man falls into this fog, he dies. And they had a very small story element of it, but it wasn't really part of the story. It was just a limitation. And so for me, I was thinking, right, what happens if this fog just can't support the person that Spider-Man is, and it's an atmosphere that can support someone else? And then at the same time, I was looking at Five Nights at Freddy. I don't know if anyone's played Five Nights at Freddy. It's this horror game. It's all pre-rendered graphics, which essentially means these are all images stitched together. None of the graphics are running in real-time 3D. It's all just essentially, you could interpret it as like video files. And I was really interested in trying to use the same techniques as this game and pairing it with this fog to make a city that's got this fog that you go to the city to figure out if it's there for you or there because of you. And so if you're going to survive in this fog, or if you are going to die in this fog, essentially. And so, it's a little whatever. This game was born, which I will play with you, called I Can't Remember a Time I Didn't Need You. And so I'm going to stop this. It does have sound, but I'm going to mute it because otherwise you won't be able to hear me. Okay. You can see this, yes? Perfect. Okay, so this is how it kind of starts. Another thing is that I made it after my friend had passed away. And so that's why it's kind of based around a city, because they moved to a new city and then they died in that city. And so for me, I was thinking of this fog as, if an atmosphere came that supported their life, maybe they would have survived. That's kind of one of the underpinning themes of that. Yeah. Let's do this. I feel it. Here we go. Yeah, you can listen to the sound on your own, but you won't be able to hear anything I'm saying, sorry. So the first thing you do is put your name in. So I'll put my name in. And you kind of start, and it gives you this intro about you driving to the city. Anyway, we're gonna skip that. And then it kind of introduces you to this very foggy city. And the first thing that you have to do in this game is it kind of gives you a short introduction, which I will read. Finally, you are here. It looks a lot grimier than it did in your head. The streets are empty with a thick yellow fog obscuring your vision. It didn't look like this in the picture your friend sent you. And then you look at the picture your friend sent you and you're like, oh my God, what the hell? So the last picture your friend sent you before. You promised that you'd call back home and tell them that you had arrived safely. You should find a payphone. You also have heard you need to register before you can do anything here. You wonder why that is so. You really don't like filling out papers about your identity. And so you enter the city. And one of the tricks of this is that you can't go anywhere until you register. And that's the case because I was in Berlin at the time, and you have to register your identity in Berlin. Like you have to, if you want to live anywhere, you have to register, unless you're like living off the grid. So you go to the registration office and there's this wonderful, creepy face of me. Your identity will be determined here. What's revealed to your gaze will depend on how you identify. This place has been taken over by a fog that specifically supports Black trans life. It allows them to breathe in an atmosphere that supports them. If you are not Black and trans, this fog may have unwanted side effects. In order to be in this fog, you must answer some questions. All people who pass through here need to do this. Are you ready? Of course we are. So, what would you describe yourself, describe your gender as? Okay, who's gonna do it? Who's gonna pick? You lot thought this was gonna be an easy thing you could just sit back and watch. Who's gonna pick? First person to shout out. Otherwise I'll start calling people by their names. This is where the true horror starts. Yeah, go, your hands up, go for it.
I do it. So I'm non-binary.
There we go. So we are happy to have you here. I'm sorry you had to choose a tick box option like this. You must be tired of seeing these forms where when you have to identify yourself. Last question though, are you Black? Yes, I am. No, I'm not.
No, I'm not.
Okay, this is a good time to remind you, a visit here does not make you a better friend or a person to the Black trans people in your life, if there are any, eek. Lastly, why did you decide to come to the City of Dreams?
I came I came so that I had nowhere else to go.
Okay. Perfect. Your identity has been determined. You may enter all places in the city now. Remember, your identity is responsible for what you experience. Leave. So where shall we go? And don't pick alleyway because we need the audio for alleyway. Sorry.
To the club.
Club. Hey, welcome to Chemical Club. It's a pro-black trans night tonight, like every night. Please go in. And you go in, and you get a little stamp. There is some creepy sound that plays. Just be yourself. Okay, everyone is here dancing to cover something up. So we can either talk to dancer, or talk to dancer. We can say 1, 2, or 3.
Oh, 3.
Okay. I'm losing my hair. I'm a fucking trans woman and I'm losing my hair. I know women can have no hair and also lose their hair. But without my hair, I don't feel like a woman. I don't feel like me. So when I lose it all, what do? I know it's not your problem. I know it's mine. I have to learn to live myself without a wig or my hair. They walk away. In the middle of the night, you notice someone dancing alone by themselves. Maybe everyone is avoiding them. Creep towards them or leave them alone.
Creep towards them.
Now that you are close, you can see that they are moving unnaturally. It makes you feel uneasy. They are muttering to themselves. Creep closer. Person minding their own business. What the fuck are you doing? Why are you creeping up on me for? Is this how you get your kicks? Creeping up on people? Your curiosity is violent. Leave me alone. You leave full of shame. Did you think creeping up on someone was a good idea here? You dance for a while and swap stories with everyone, blah, 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 blah. And so you kind of get it. And so like the different choices you make, different things happen. And eventually you get to like a Black Lives Matter protest. And the ending is depending on like what you do there. And so, yeah, so that, I don't know, it's a weird one because it's, when I think of horror, like I think of environments that like I feel scared in, you know, or I try and think of like, what would I be scared of? Like, what's a scary thing for me to think about? And it's not always monsters. And in this game, there's a temple, and inside the temple, there's this, I'm kind of ruining it, but there's this monster of privilege, and you get to meet this monster of privilege, and it's your monster. It's like your own monster that's already there. And depending what you do, you can defeat this monster of privilege or not, but it's all dependent on like actually you and what answers you type in. And so it will ask you to type in like what privileges you have and ask you to say it out loud and say that like, what can you even do to like use these privileges? Like, are these privileges even privileges? Kind of questions that. And if you can actually use them to help anyone or not, because obviously it's not as simple as like just saying, I have this privilege, I can help everyone. It's not how the world works, but it questions like, you know, not even thinking about them can also make something kind of monstrous, you know, make some of your decisions seem very unempathetic and careless. And that's the kind of horror. And so a lot of my horror is based in like you and trying to make you think about the things that you're doing and things that you haven't done. And if when something bad happens to you, how you've done that to someone else, and actually you're just experiencing the influences you've maybe had on someone else. And so in this one, there is like an eye operation scene, which is so intense. And it's trying to remove the violent gaze in your eye, but it's really creepy because it's trying to do something that's good because no one wants a violent gaze in their eye, but at the same time, it's like a horrible procedure that you run away from. So like that's the kind of thing I'm trying to play with. I don't know how successful, but I'm trying to do that. So yeah, here's some pictures, blah, blah. We had better than pictures. And then I did this show called Haunting Alongside Our Shadows in Quad in Derby. These are some of the images. And it was like this, how to describe it? So it had 5 games in it. And one game was called Pirating Blackness, which is the one on the left-hand side, and you sit on this boat to play it. And essentially you go through the history of your ancestors on the sea. And so I think the first question is, who are your ancestors? Are they like colonizers, or are they people that were carried across the sea? And like at first glance, it seems like a very simple question, but it's actually not. Like if you like try and look into what your ancestors did, you know, because often people are like, okay, like simple, you know, if you're white, you carry people across the sea, and if you're not white, you didn't. But that's not exactly how that works, and that's not exactly true, because you know, slavery and the slave system was like much wider than we're often taught and we often think about. And often a lot of people participated in both things, being carried across the sea and, you know, having carried others across the sea to participate in slavery. And so that's a really hard, horrible question to actually answer. It's kind of like, right, like who are my actual ancestors? What did they do? And if your answer is colonizers, then your journey is doomed to fail. And so you will never make the end of your journey. And the point of the journey is that your ancestors die in order to protect the lives of others. And if you are people who are carried across the sea, then you go on this alternative history where you reset history. And those ancestors that were put into slavery or did die on the sea, never died, and actually survived that time period, and then build a new world in the present. So there's a little bit of time travel in the film, and it's like set both in the past and in the present. And you can play it online as well at blacktransc.com. And that's something I often do, is like building this online versions. But in the exhibition, there were also these other games. I think, so maybe it's actually 4 games. And so on the left-hand side is another version of the same game, but just made completely different. And so you have a completely different experience of how you're experiencing that history. Then I don't have a picture of it. Then there's a text-based adventure where you're dropped in the middle of the ocean and you have to try and not drown, which is horrible. And then there's this tapestry on the right-hand side, which talks about the first trans thought and how it evolved into something that was outside the body. And you play it with a dance mat. And so there were all these different ways of thinking about essentially similar things, and similar kind of journeys of the sea, of water, of drowning, of surviving. And I'm gonna make sure I'm okay with time, okay. And then my last one, apologies, I did rush that one, but the last one, because I want to talk about this one, is based on, has anyone played this game, House of the Dead? So for those that haven't played it, it's like an arcade gun shooter. So you get a gun, you point at the screen, and you blast these zombies, and these zombies go, ah! And it's one of those cheesy horrors. So, you know, like, you know, you have like scary horror, and then you have like just B horror, where the themes are the same, but like, it's not scary. You're having a fun time. No one's taking it seriously. The voice acting isn't acting, it's your friends. And so it's kind of based off this. And so I kind of made this whole show around this idea that the horror was in like the gun, the action of shooting. And instead you're put in a situation where, you know, we built this gun, and, you know, built the game, and you play this game, but we don't tell you who's the right person to shoot and who's not. And so the first thing that you do when you walk up to the gun is you pull the trigger, because it says shoot to start. And then the game kind of insults you for being excited to, it doesn't insult you, but it talks about you being excited to shoot in a game, and how games make it so easy to shoot someone. And then it says that, asks you questions about, do you even think that you can protect someone using a weapon without, in the end, harming, or that weapon being used against that person you're trying to protect? And then the game says, but you have to shoot people in this game to win. And so when the game starts, you have 3 levels to pick from. I don't know if I showed that. you have to shoot these people that you have no idea which ones you're supposed to shoot. So the game says, don't shoot Black trans people. It says, shoot the people who are invading the space, but you don't know. And it's really hard to figure out who you're supposed to shoot and when you're supposed to make that action without failing. And it's pretty much designed for you to fail the first time. And you have to try and figure out what you're doing by looking around the exhibition and trying to like find clues and stuff. But yeah, like the kind of horror is in that like you're asked to do an action which is impossible. It's like an impossible task. And so often when we tested it, people would just not shoot anything and then fail. And then when you fail, you see an ending of like these Black trans people being pulled under the sea and all this kind of stuff. And so they're like, oh, I feel awful. I didn't even do anything. And then we're like, yeah, like your inaction also causes harm. And so it's like, it's just this impossible situation where the horror is actually, you're having to act on no information and not understanding what you're seeing. And then you're also at the same time surrounded by these demons that are just watching you. As well as this, there's this one that kind of, it's got a bio of each of the characters. And this is like the space you go in before. It kind of, there's this film on the side that hypes you up because something that we were learning when we were trying to test this game out was that you had to give people a narrative in which they, again, filled in a lot of blanks in their head to then have that rug of you don't know what you're doing and you're in a really difficult situation. And so this film on the left-hand side kind of talks all about this power of this gun, get ready to pick up this gun, get ready to shoot. And so you go in that room like pumped up, you know, kind of like really excited. How kind of video games make you very excited to like shoot things and make it feel really nice? And then you pick up this gun, which feels like a handbag and is like fleshy. And it doesn't feel powerful, it feels very unpowerful. And then the game is like, I'm so disappointed at you that you were excited. Now shoot someone, but I won't tell you who to shoot. And then you're like, right, get me out of this room. And it was a really interesting one because often people would just watch the person who's got the gun, and that made it 10 times worse. And that I didn't expect that, but like we did set up, like I wonder if I have a screen. Yeah, we did set up like cameras in there so you can watch people play, but people would stand like next to them and just be looking at them and be like, what are you gonna shoot? And it would make it worse because like when they saw that person didn't do very well, they would be like, oh, you're awful, like you're an awful person. So there would be like this judgment kind of going on in the room where that's where all this horror would be. Because in the game, nothing scary kind of happens. Well, actually some little scary stuff happens. And I'm gonna show you one of the endings actually. And hopefully what I'm saying does make sense. Let's go here, here, here. Okay.
Your actions have mimicked the dance of white supremacy. You laid the table. And now, you are dining alongside it. Watching it eat. Watching it grow. Each of these meals represents a group that supremacy feeds off, that it takes from. And now, you have your own plate. Your own plate you are feeding off. Did you really think your actions would have no consequences? Did you really think no one would know? You have disappointed everyone except this monster.
So yeah, oh, that's funny, sorry. And so yeah, you would get like endings like that. So you'd feel like really bad, you know. They're like designed just to make you feel bad. I was just like, well, how do you make someone just feel awful? You know, and everyone feels awful. It's like, doesn't matter who you are, you're just like, oh God, like, why do I have this stupid ending? Like, you know, I was just watching it, I was like appreciating it, because there's all these like mocapped people who are dancing. It's basically like a big ballet. Like it's very easy just to watch it, so it is a big ballet. So you forget your task, that the game is like, you need to cleanse this world. And then when you fail, everyone's just like, oh, I got so many like, why are you doing this to me? Like, why are you putting this in there? But yeah, it was just this idea of failing, and like this idea of also like not being scared to fail, that you've got to fail, like you've got to try, you've got to keep trying, keep doing it, was kind of like the aim around this one. And then I think, yeah, and then here's some other pictures, blah, blah, blah. And that's kind of the end of my presentation. And so what we can either do is, because do we have like half an hour left? Is that right? Or is it just an hour?
It's just an hour, but I think it'd be really great. I'm sure people have a lot of questions. So if you have any time to answer them, that would be great.
No, sorry. Yeah, I thought it was an hour and a half. I'm really sorry.
No. It's so interesting hearing you talk about all the work. It's amazing, and I'm sure everyone has lots of things to ask. So has anyone got any questions for Danielle?
Yes. Hi. Thank you so much. It's really interesting. Yeah, I was wondering, you're talking a lot about the public and how they are engaged in your work. And I was wondering, like, who is the audience that is coming to your work? And like, do you want to reach some people and not others? Like, how do you do this? Because you're working in Berlin right now?
Yeah, but I'm in London.
Okay. Yeah, so yeah, that's what was my question.
Yeah, so so usually my audience is, it's a weird question, because usually we make it for Black trans people, because we work with Black trans people. We build like a team, a temporary team for each project. And so we make it for those people because we're archiving them. And so that last game was actually made with two artists, and I wanted to like archive their movement because one of them's a dancer. And I was thinking about the history within the body, and history within like how people move and how people can move in certain ways and others can't. And so I kind of made it for them, you know, I just made it for them. But we showed it in London. And so I think that crowd was a very art crowd. But the archive was literally made, the Black Trans Archive, because there isn't a Black Trans Archive. There still isn't, apart from the one we made, that didn't exist. And I think there is a new one being made this year. But when we were making it at the time, you couldn't, if you searched in Black Trans history, Black Trans Archive, archival stuff of Black Trans people, you get nothing apart from that poster. And so I think my audience is usually the community I'm working with. And then we kind of have to work in and weave in all these other choices for all the other identities. And so that's why often when you pick, you have like this huge swath of identities to pick from, so that we can make sure the experience you have is tailored towards you and who you are, rather than a homogenized idea of like what the audience is.
Hi, I have also a question, and thank you. It's so inspiring. I'm like overwhelmed with so many thoughts, and I was wondering about how you the process of how you write these scripts, or like these monologues of the films. Yeah, mainly like the process.
Yeah, that's a good question. I just finished one today as well. Okay, it's gonna sound really rubbish to start with, but so what I usually do is like I have an idea of like, I want to talk about, so as using the one I did today as an example, I wanted to write about a cosmic horror, like, and I didn't, you know, the idea of a cosmic horror is very new to me, because I only had heard about it in Stephen King's book when I read it recently. And so this idea of a cosmic horror for me was like, okay, maybe there's like this being that causes supremacy to happen. And that's the cosmic horror that I want to write about. And so I kind of try to lay out a short story. And so how I usually do that is I just do sentence, space, like a whole, what's it called? Next line, then a sentence, then a next line, then a sentence. It doesn't usually make the best of sense, but usually it's like, supremacy is dead. It has been crystallized into a form. There's now a ritual to keep supremacy from dying, but someone wants to bring it back. They try and bring it back with the spark of hate, blah, blah, blah. And so then I have that, and it's like you kind of get the beginning and end. It's rubbish. It's rubbish. Like you'll read it, you'll be like, why? Why do you make art? It's rubbish. And then what I do is like, I try and make those sentences paragraphs. And then, so then you add like characters to each of those bits, and you try and build on like, okay, what's happened? What does it look like when this thing wakes up? What moments are scary? Like what things do I want people to feel at this moment? Who do I want people to think about? Who is the person that's betraying everyone? Because if supremacy dies, it's good for everyone. Why is this person bringing it back? So what's the backstory to that? And then so I go through it and I do that. And then one of the weirdest things I do is that I take it paragraph by paragraph and put it into a text to speech. And then I listen to it. And then when you listen to it, you can really tell if your writing is rubbish or good. Because if you get bored, then you rewrite that bit. And if it doesn't sound right, then you rewrite it. Because in a text to speech, when that starts sounding really good, like an audiobook, for me, I feel like, then this script is good because I'm interested in someone reading my own writing. And that's kind of what I do. And I play with the different voices as well, just to, there's you know, I just Google Translate or like Amazon's Polly. So that last video I just showed you, I used Amazon's Polly as the white supremacist voice because it seems quite fitting to use Amazon's voice as the white supremacist voice. Like, I don't know, it was kind of like an interesting thing because I just put it in there to hear it. And I was like, yeah, this works, okay. And so, yeah, like one thing I'm a big advocate for is like getting either an AI to read it back or a friend to read it straight to you. Because then if you're cringing when you're hearing it, you're like, oh, you need to work on it.
Thank you. That's yeah, it gives so many ideas also for our projects, like how to construct these worlds and then employ horror in it. I think it's so inspiring. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you so much.
You have a question?
I just had a wee question. Thank you for your time today as well. It's really interesting. But also in regards to when you're researching, like, did you find any thing in the horror movie genre that I know you looked at, like Sleepaway Camp, for example, which is quite like shocking, really, when you watch it back. And I was wondering if there was anything you found where maybe a trans person was depicted more as like an anti-hero, or like maybe not so othered as the monster, because there's not really much material there that I've been able to find, or even as the hero of the story.
So not in movies, like I haven't found a movie like that. There was Kill the Rich. It's not a horror movie, apologies, but it's like I think it's the first movie directed by a trans woman in 1980 something. And it's a horror movie if you're a rich person, I guess, because it's like they're killing the rich. It's like, it's exactly what it is. But I haven't really found one where a trans person is kind of the unsung anti-hero, or just even a person.
Yeah.
Like, it's even hard to find them as just a person. But there's this one game called, I need to get the name right, because last time I called it J.J. Abrams' The Missing, but it's not that. Missing. Here it is. The Missing, J.J. Macfield and the Island of Memories. And so I am spoiling the story, apologies. But essentially, like, you play as this girl whose girlfriend goes missing. And then, and it's a kind of a horror thing because she has to like blow off parts of her body to solve puzzles. So it sounds awful. But it's written by 5 trans women who were brought in to write it. And it turns out that the whole story is about her being trans and like her getting her mum to accept her as trans. And for most of the story, like it doesn't talk about that. And, it doesn't care about that. It's trying to just tell this story through what you're seeing. And so that's the only kind of thing I've seen where one, had trans writers on the team, and 2, made this really creepy, weird story where like trans people are people and they have relationships and conversations and, texting their mom and all this kind of stuff. And there is some problems with it, like, you are blowing her up most of the time. So it is wild. But that's the only example I can actually think of where like they actually were seeing them as a person, like a multifaceted person, rather than the end or sleepaway camp where the person's just trans. And you're like, oh, okay, okay. But I'm sure I'm missing some examples. I'm sure there are examples out there of like better examples, and I can try and find some, I think.
Yeah, if I find anything, I'll send it through as well. But thank you very much.
I have, but again, I'm a nerd, so they're games. So there is this thing called PS1, Haunted PS1. Essentially, it is a free fake demo disc where people showcase their games, where they make them and they all look like PS1 games, but they're made now. And in those collections, and they're all free, there are a load of examples of actually like anti-hero trans people and just like works around trans people. Oh, okay, they're all coming back to me. Kitty Horror Show's Anatomy. These are games, okay, I'm a nerd. But you can watch playthroughs of them. Kitty Horror Show's Anatomy, amazing example. 100% amazing example, super fantastic. You should look at all Kitty Horror Show's games. They are fantastic at doing exactly that, of like making this where like trans people or just other people are kind of the anti-hero and the horror is something else, and it's not to do with their body really. It's just, there's the Anatomy is all about, I know I don't want to spoil it. I spoil everything. I won't spoil that one. But yeah, they are an amazing game designer, and all their games I think are free, so you're fine. And another person, this is okay, last one if you're into games and nerdy, Puppet Combo. So this person makes horror games. They're just so good. They're so good. That's it. Oh no, and okay, all right, I have a book. This next one as well. Okay, this book. It's called Nerve. Oh no, let me do this so you can see what my real house looks like. None. Okay, it's called Nerve Endings. And so it's supposed to be like a short erotic stories, but half of them are like horror stories, where like the characters happen to be queer or trans, but they're in a zombie apocalypse or in a haunted house or a demon. It's a really good book, and like lots of like stuff happens in it, and I think that's a really, probably you'll find better examples in that one.
Cool.
I'd just like to say that your work is so fascinating, and I could listen to you speak about it all day. Like, I'm so inspired. But I wanted to ask you a bit more about like the creation process, because the visuals are so they're so amazing, and I wanted to know like kind of like a bit of the process behind that. Like, is it all digital?
Yeah. Yes and no. Okay, there's a lot of cheating going along. Like this happens a lot in the digital world, but when things look very complicated, they're usually extremely easy. So a lot of things I do are like use JPEGs as background. So they're like, oh, it's all 3D, I modeled this, but I didn't. and there's a lot of things where I like take textures. Maybe I'll just go through the process. So we're at the beginning. Usually they come from a little bit like a diary. So I keep a 3D diary, which essentially means every day I model something to represent something in my life. Just as you would write a diary, I find it easier to do like a sketch or a 3D thing. It's just much easier for me because otherwise I'm going to lose that diary. And so it usually starts from that. And so as an example, maybe it's, I walked home alone at night. I was in this residency and I had to walk home alone at night every night. And like, it was about a 20-minute walk, and it was just, I was finding it really creepy just because it was so dark. It was in the middle of the countryside. I don't know anyone there. And so as part of that, I say, okay, let me keep a diary of this. So I 3D scanned it. So now I have this 3D scanned object. And so, okay, like, what am I scared of? What am I thinking of is the thing that's following me? And so I say, okay, let me try and model that. And so I would try and think of like what this thing is following me. The only thing I could think of is like a shadow. So I'd model a shadow. And then I'd say, okay, like, then I need something to represent myself walking. And I don't often like using like pictures of myself in the work. So I will maybe like model someone else or ask my friend to sit in. So I'll model them. And it's usually I take pictures of them and I put it on like something like this. And I use like a very easy program called Photoanim that turns photos into 3D objects. And then from that, I say, okay, how can I tell this story? And then I do that writing process thing that I do, where I write the lines out. So I have to walk home at night. The walk is 20 minutes. I get scared every time I go under the bridge. I always look behind me and I can't stop once I start. I get home and I'm fine. Then I like flesh that out and like add characters and then add like noises and sound of like, right, what does that thing sound like? What would it sound like if it actually was there? What would I do if I saw it? You know, and I do the what if questions, and then like I build the story out. And then once I have that, then I go back in and say, right, so if I saw it, it would come and run at me. So now I need to like model like that and render that. And I, you know, maybe I don't know how to do that. So I'd use another program that like I run and I make myself a shadow and something like this. So it's not so much of like a simple process of like, this is what I do, but it's usually like looking at a real life example, bringing those real fears in and trying to represent them as best I can. But it's not really about representing them cleanly. It's just about sketching them out and putting them down and getting them there. And then the more you kind of put onto it, you'll kind of clean it up. And so by the end, you'll have something that looks very like nice, but actually most of the process was very sketchy and messy until it felt right. So I often just describe them as like a visual diary, because that's literally the process. Like if I showed you the background of the scene, you would just see my notes everywhere. And like I write in 3D space. I don't know how helpful this is. Maybe one day I could just show you a lot. But yeah.
Do you have programs that you would recommend people using to create similar like?
Yeah. So everything I use is free apart from Premiere Pro. So the programs I would say, for me, Blender, I love Blender, just because it's free, it works on every machine. There's a bunch of different versions if you want it. And there's tutorials, there's enough tutorials. There's too many tutorials. There's a tutorial for everything. You're like, I want hair, so there's a tutorial. So there's always something you can learn. Like it's not gonna be something that you're like, how do I do this? And everyone will know, they'll tell you everything. And it doesn't cost you a penny. And then the next thing I use, but this is for PC only. So if you have a PC, this is good, is Photoanim. And I'm gonna actually post that in the chat. It is a rubbish program. I'll let you know beforehand. It is a rubbish program, but the best thing about this rubbish program is that it is so straightforward. Like I can even, you know what, we're gonna do it right now. I'll show you. Okay, so this is Photoanim. So all you need to do is add a picture in. So you add a picture in just like you would do any other software. So I'm just gonna, I got this picture from Tensei. I'm gonna drag it in. Oh, I can't use that picture, fine. I got this picture from this game, why not? You just drag it in. So you got this picture of, you know, preferably something better than this, but like any picture that you want. And then just like any kind of Photoshop tool or anything, you just cut out what you want. So you're like, oh, I want this head to be 3D. Wow, okay. Please excuse my terrible cutting out. And then you press initialize, and now it's 3D. And so like I built, the last game, She Keeps Me Damn Alive, is literally all the characters are built in this program. And so everything I do use this program, and it's free. It's so straightforward. And it was the program that got me into 3D because I found it so hard. Like, you know, it's good to know that like, I'm not like a whiz kid. Like, I'm not like someone that just picks this up like out of nowhere. Like I had to work really hard because I found it so just in my mind, so abstract. I didn't understand what it meant to make a 3D thing. And so this program is really helpful just because you can use a photo as a starting point while you're trying to learn the program. And so that lets you like learn more simple things rather than modeling from scratch, because that's really difficult. And although there are loads of tutorials, like it's just nice to start like this. It's nice to have easier things. Another thing I would say is that you all probably have mobile phones. And I use so many of those apps. So I use apps called 3D Scanner. And the best one actually for all of you is a Polycam, because you don't need a LiDAR sensor, you can just take photos. And that lets you scan real life places. And then it makes it into a 3D model that you just have now. And it's perfectly textured and it looks very realistic. And so that's a really good app. There's another one that I use for sound called Vocalo, which if you sing into it, it makes you sound like Kanye West. So everything you say, it sounds great. So your music can be made in 5 seconds. There's another app called, and I'll show you, it's called Bella's Face app. And that one, and I'll show you what you can do with it. I was testing this the other day, but it lets you scan your face and make a really good scan of it. So don't judge me for this video. Oh, it might not play because it's square. No, it will play, thank goodness. Okay.
Do you, want to make assets for a game jam? I am running a workshop.
Right, so you get the idea. And that app, it is paid, but it only costs. So like it doesn't pay you to scan your face. And scanning your face is as simple as you put your phone in front of it and then you turn like this and you're done. And it costs, I think, like 50p to get the file. And so if you just need 1 or 2, it's like £1, so that's pretty good. So yeah, those are the kind of files I use, the programs, and they're all free apart from the Face app and Premiere Pro to edit the films. And for sound, as a last one, I use, so bad, but I still use the free version of Fruity Loops, which is this program you can get the trial version, and I've used the trial version for 6 years now. But essentially what that means is that you can't save. But that works very well for me because then I just, I'll make the sound in a sitting. And so as a diary, it's very helpful because, you don't spend 2 months writing your diary, you spend an hour a day making your diary. So as that's the kind of way I work, I just make the sound in an hour. If it's rubbish, it's rubbish. If it's good, it's good. But I do it every day. So one day you'll get something all right.
Sorry, could you repeat the name of this voice app? What is it called?
So one of them is called Vocalo, or let me get it. Let me make sure I'm getting the name right. Voloco. Okay, Voloco. And this is, you can get this on any phone.
Ah, okay.
Completely free, 100% free. Best thing you can also do is if you make background music or beats or whatever, you can bring those tracks in and then sing on top of it.
Oh, nice.
It's really, really good. And then the other one is called Fruity Loops, or FL Studio, which is the fancy name. And that's also free as a trial version. If you want to pay for it, I actually don't know how much it costs because I've never paid for it. But the trial version lets you do everything. Just you can't save.
Amazing. Thank you.
No worries. And there's one more program that is really cool. I'm gonna have to find it though. What are you called?
Danielle, this is amazing. This is so helpful. Thank you so much. Sorry, we've kept you way beyond your time, but it's fine. This is really helpful information, so thank you.
No worries. There's because as you're making, are you making like a film? What are you not making?
So there's a number of different deliverables. One is an output that could be anything. So some people might end up making films. Another is a podcast, and then something written. So, but we are doing a little bit of Spark AR. So things like this would be really, really helpful.
Oh, I've got to find this program. I'm really annoyed. There's this, oh, it's so annoying that I can't find it. Oh, here it is, no, EB Synth, isn't it? Yes, oh, perfect. Okay, so there's this program called EB Synth. And if you need to make a scary image that moves, this is really helpful. I'm gonna pop it in the chat. And I'll show you an example so you can also understand what I am talking about. And it will be in, should be here. I love that I can make my files seem very organized and they're not. It'll actually be in. Okay, so I'm going to share with you this one. Right, so you're like, okay, what is going on? So basically, this is me holding a broom with a bunch of towels on my head. Okay, so each of these characters, I'm literally in my dressing gown, holding a broom with towels on my head. And this program, EB Synth, lets you, so if you take a video of you holding a broom with towel on your head or whatever, just to give yourself a nice silhouette, you put it in a video editing software and export it as images, like, a load of JPEGs. You take one of those images and you draw over it. Draw whatever you want. If you want to make it super creepy, you put eyes here, noses there. You draw on, on your face, like replace the eyes, whatever, creepiness, whatever you need to do. And then you add all those images into the program and it takes that one image that you drew over and then an AI interprets it for the entirety of all the images, and then you get a moving film out of it. So it's really amazing and so quick. Like, all these 3D stuff takes a much longer time, but this one takes like 5 minutes. Like, you film yourself with a towel on your head. Like, the weirder you make your silhouette, the better you can do. You can make yourself look like a whole monster. And then you put it in the program and you're done. And so I would 100% recommend this one if you want to play with something or you're trying to like build this kind of, if you have a scene where you need a face to look really creepy, or like you need to like add effects to it or trying to do like a special effects and you don't want to waste a week, try this out. Especially, it's really helpful. And the glitches that come are really cool. But I don't know, it's a program that I'm new to, but it's like super helpful. I can show you one more example of like what it can do. Okay, don't judge me on this one again. All right.
Hey, you looking mighty fine today, my friend. Thanks. What have you done? I mean, you know, I just had my glow up. Looked in the mirror and I fucking glowed up. Yeah, look pretty every day, but I didn't know it. Till I got my pride in order and I show it. I'm a black trans beauty with power. You can't take it from me, never ever ever. Black trans power lives in my body and my soul. It will never get lost till I'm old. Yeah, my eyes don't work so good no more, but I still see power in my reflection. Got no mirrors in my house, but I don't need them.
So you kind of get what I mean. And so that was literally like me on my webcam, just making up a song, and I filmed myself doing it. And then I was like, well, I need an Instagram post today. And then I just put it in this program and then just quickly drew over one image and then just let it do its thing. And so like, I just love this program because it's just so straightforward and like, it looks really interesting. It looks like a whole painting. So yeah, I would definitely 100% recommend it.
Does anyone have maybe any final questions before? I mean, Danielle, I think we never want you to leave now, but does anyone have any final questions?
No, it's more like I'm really impressed how you reinvent the codes, like because you're not just like trying to fit in the codes that exist, but like you're reinventing them. Like the bordering project was really like also powerful, I think, because it looked like a blurring, but it has something that you added, like, and also like archiving, you changed the way of archive. Like, I think it's really nice how you make new codes by using what they exist already, and yeah, reinventing them in this weird environment. It's really nice. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think there's so much. I wrote down tragic irony when you were talking. I think there's like, you know, people go into the game and they might have a sense of what's coming, right, but they, you know, like you still are playing. So the audience is kind of in on it regardless. But we've been talking a lot amongst the research group that, you know, we've been saying to everyone, what keeps you awake at night? And I think like after experiencing your games, I like to think that people might go to bed at night and they're not, you know, like you said, it's not things jumping out at you, but like there's something that remains with you.
Yeah, I hope so. Oh, that would be great. Touch wood.
Well, Danielle, thank you so much for your time and for staying with us, you know, for an extra half an hour. This is amazing resources and such a fantastic talk. So thank you so much.
No worries. Good luck, everyone. I look forward to see what you make.
Yay, thank you.
Wow.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wow, that was awesome. Okay.